Good evening, anybody watching? Uh, this is Awesome Ellie. This is my third writing stream, although mostly just reading and editing so far. Uh, Almost to the halfway point. Stream rules: don't be weird. No personal information. Title suggestions are welcome. And yeah, we are on chapter 11 at this point. With the preceding 10 chapters largely focusing on our viewpoint character, one Mila Vita, who is one half adventure in a fantasy setting based on the Deep South, another half person crammed into that first half's body, uh, a person from ostensibly our world, although close enough, or at least close enough to our real world that don't have to worry about actually doing world building for it. So. And same as the previous streams, looking for chapter titles pulled from the chapter text for a suitably punchy title. And I will likely be highlighting bits as I come to them. In any world, there was very little that Mila found more peaceful than a bookstore. The largest, most warehouse-like bookstores of Scienceland were just as serene as the magically tinged, cozy affairs of Fantasyland, and both were perfect. Not that she was particularly meditative, but the homes of books always filled her with a contentment that she associated with how others described their deep relaxation exercises. It did not magically erase her run in with Oren. She expected the sour encounter to hang over her for hours, if not days, but it did help it along. The two cats that lived in the store, a big gray boy and an adorable calico, also helped, even if their healing attention was for their own selfish feline ends. After all, it was an open secret in house cat circles that the people with stubby claws gave the best scritches. That Mila was weighed down under the glut of sweets she had overindulged in, not quite to the point of feeling ill, but close, just gave the bookshop all the more of a warm, heavy feeling. It made her want to plop down in one of the overstuffed armchairs, much too large for a kobold, and bring both cats with her. Maybe live out the rest of her life in the shop, dispensing wisdom alongside her two new familiars. Unfortunately, it was not meant to be as nice as that sounded. And not just because the gray-blue perma kitten, second, Gustus, muscled his way after Aurora as she wound her way into the deep stacks of the crowded shop. Mila also quite suspected that her wisdom was some mix of blatantly wrong for most other folks and wildly hypocritical. It was easy to tell someone else to stand up for themselves, but like many things, straightforward and simple was very much a different league than easy, as she had just so brutally demonstrated to herself. Sorry, just doing a little highlighting. No, esoteric advice-granting cat lady was out of the question, as pleasant as that might sound overall. That left her to start her own tome spelunking, the yowling, salty demanding constant pets as she, too, moved to follow. Mila wanted to show her appreciation to Aurora, even if she felt it had to be in the sneaky, polite way of not actually saying thanks. With that in mind, she set off to the left, where the store's loose organization tended to house its mix of romance books that might, if glanced out of the corner of your eye, be confused with another genre. Something that she could pass off as having picked up for the other genre elements, be they fantasy or action or mystery. They were hardly high literature, but if you wanted to purchase such esteemed reading materials, you'd be better suited to going to a shop closer to the center of the city, whose books were all dusty. If you wanted books that wanted to be read, though, this impending collapse was where you wanted to browse. As such, it was almost all practical nonfiction and pulp novels. The first flicked through book that she could actually the first flicked through book that she actually took up with intention to buy was a science fiction horror affair about a dinosaur in an icy climate, with some cliche romance B plot to tick a box. Which this is based on an actual novel, I believe. Carnotaur. Just a second, I'm pulling it up. Um, Pulp horror stuff is always a good time, especially the cheesier elements. Um, the book Carnivore by Lee Clark, released who knows when. Uh, okay, apparently only 1997. Amazon knows when. The first flicked through book that she actually took up with intention to buy was a science fiction horror affair about a dinosaur in an icy climate, with some cliche romance B plot to tick a box. The romance being for the people, not the dinosaur, of course. Pulp romance in Fantasyland was not emotionally prepared for Chuck Tingle, no matter how raunchy some of the books she put back might be. A couple more tickled at her notice, picked up, but mentally assigned to a maybe category reserved for stories that did not have dinosaurs. She had a hard time not thinking too much about the cultural differences between the two worlds. She was already starting to feel forced to the forefront. Oh, no, sorry. She had a hard time not thinking too much about the cultural differences between her two worlds. That she was already starting to feel forced to the forefront of her mind as she meandered. That Fantasyland had pulp novels that she associated with a certain rosy, if problematic, place in the literary history of Scienceland was fascinating, even if she could feel and smell that these were made differently. She had no idea how. The Mila from here had never seen one of those encyclopedias full of cutaway diagrams of architecture and machines that might explain the Fantasyland book printing methods, but it was still clearly different, the pages even having the faintest orange tinge that was not from aging. The science fiction felt quaint and airy, while the books that Rora would call fantasy all featured sorry, while the books that Rora would call fantasy all felt peculiarly small scale. There were no grand evils or great armies, and all the twiddly fantasy elements went out of their way to highlight how alien it all felt. Which made sense, Mila supposed, if magic via divine cooking was a relatively mundane thing to get used to for the nonfiction books. Trying to swallow that lump set off another burst of dissonance in her head, but she tried to center it all. The feline tail that wound its way into the palm of her hand several times over, the buzzing period helped. Even if the cat head to the hip did less great things for her balance. Not too much apocalypse talk, nor some of the more politically charged fare that Science Land Mila knew came alongside the pulp literature revolution. She did not know if Kurt Vonnegut had any half-romance novels, admittedly. It did not feel like his kind of work. His Fantasyland equivalent following that trend was clearly a missed opportunity. Conan-type stories had whole shelves, and none of them sported the same names as what came to mind for similar books from Science Land. It had not quite consciously occurred to her before she started looking and comparing, but Mila reckons that if she was trying to reach out to folks in a similar position, isekai'd away from Science Land, then doing so by media and stories would be a good way to do it. Red Sonja, in a title, would not have anyone bat an eye unless you knew of her as the chainmail bikini clad badass, a trend that was not widely mirrored here. No, battle swimwear was almost a disappointment. While she did not quite have the equipment to handle a bikini top, kobolds being hatched and not needing milk, it would have been an amusing thing to play around with, a decent distraction from the stuff she promptly steered her thoughts away from, for at least a little longer. The barrage of cat-induced distractions continued to siege Jamila's book shopping, but eventually she emerged thankful she had experience with cramped tunnels back where she grew up. It was she was very rarely thankful for any of it, so she did not linger, shaking out her back and shoulders, juggling her finds. Mila was not absolutely certain, but she half knew that she had somehow spent several hours lost within the tomes, and had come out with only 5 books. 5 books she was looking forward to reading, admittedly, even if she had chosen them in part because she had thought Rora would enjoy them. The others read too, to one degree or another, but their tastes were further divorced from Mila's own, and none of them quite matched the kobolds in their reading rate. Just as the golden woman in question picked her way into view, a stray thought wandered into Mila's mind, drawing a snort. An Eye went up and made Mila laugh a bit more before she explained. Look, just thought about how you're such a bookworm. Like as a pun, worm and worm. The faux affronted look Rora put on only made having to retell and explain the joke that much funnier, setting Mila to laughing as Rora managed her approach. Gustus was still there trying to bowl her down, and meant that every careful step Rora took around a leaning tower of pages meant that for every careful step Rora took around a leaning tower of pages, she had to brace herself to bounce the tomcat off of her, slowing her progress. Both kobolds, once next to each other, hefted their hauls and eyed the other's titles, making sure they had not grabbed copies of the same book by mistake or accidentally picked up something that their group already owned, stacked up high in the trunk dedicated to books. The big chest of books was a stopgap more than anything, the desire to keep books for rereading or lending to others infecting the whole group. But it was also very distant from the grand personal library that both Milas dreamed of having one day. Unfortunately, neither had been able to afford such an extreme purchase as personal home ownership yet, Scienceland, Mila had been quite well off, but the housing market in the city she had claimed as her own had kept the goal out of reach. And even with the much cheaper prices for housing here in Fantasyland, a home with a room for each of the group, ignoring her aspirational library dreams, would be too much. And getting a home without her gang did not quite cross her mind. Probably all the free food Nana poured into her gullet like the world's most enthusiastic garbage disposal. Thoughts of a book haven at home aside, Mila's overview did not catch any duplicate books in Rora's selection. She did note that the novels looked particularly intriguing, though, and voiced it. Feeling more adventure-y than usual today? Just in the mood for something a little different, is all. The golden kobold gave a smile, marginally less toothy than Mila's own, but then gave a nod at Mila's stack, her own choices having evidently passed the no duplicates check. Having double-checked, it was time proper to pay for wares and head out. The felines seemed to have an acute sense for when their job was done, and allowed the two women to approach the store's owner unbody-checked. For reasons unknown, although Mila suspected amounted to an aversion to sunlight that would make the deepest cave-dwelling bold proud, Orist kept their counter at the far back of the book or of the shop, a sitting bench having been repurposed as a place where smaller customers could step up to get to the counter. Mila flowed up to the bench first, struggling to lift her books up until green-brown hands moved to take some of the weight off her hands. Oris was a terrestrial elf, and rightfully insistent about folks being specific. Far too many were more than willing to call them an elf and be done with it, along with any other terrestrial elf. But then got on to be finicky little bitches about sea elves or river elves or stone elves not being elves like the terrestrial elves. Oris' hardline stance on people trying to use that kind of othering was a strong point in their favor. Hell, it would be even if it would be even if that kind of language didn't personally affect Mila too. How are my two favorite customers? Came the question, and Mila just turned to help get Rora's books out of her hands and onto the counter, letting the other woman field the question, and trying to not think too much on how the meditative trance of the bookstore was already slipping away from her at the very well-intentioned question. It gave her whiplash, and this was much less pleasant than immersing herself in the store's ambiance had been. Thinking about that just hastened the whole ordeal, though, and Mila started to feel herself begin to spiral once more, further and further down into her own thoughts, and learned helplessness and inability to process her own feelings constructively, and Aurora broke through, reaching up to grab hold of Mila's hand to assist in her own clambering up to the top of the bench. I think Mila has a few errands back at the Wanderer Inn to take care of, but I'm sure she could help you out. For a discount next shopping trip, of course. The elf's head was thrown back with a heavy laugh, closely cropped hair catching the light. That could put me out on the streets with how much the two of you buy, practically keeping me in business single-handedly. Mila cracked a smile at the thought, even if she was confused at what she had been volunteered for. It was a teensy bit annoying that she was in a foul mood. She was getting another thing she would have to do. But she remained silent on that front. How about this? She can't fix the issue. No discount. Nothing to lose then, came the counteroffer, which didn't help the sense that she was getting the work put on her, possibly only to fuck it all up and not get anything out of it. She hadn't been paying attention, so was not sure what the work even was. Forrest gave it a flicker of a second's consideration before nodding, tallying the book's costs across their fingers at the same time. Only because I hear you do good work for Darimash, and I've hired two people to do it, and they've both failed. Took my money anyway, too. Bah. Mila's eye ridges rose a bit, hearing that apparently Darimash was bragging about their chores around the inn. But the growing sense of doom at the work continued to grow. Or at least it was until Rora shifted, bumping her shoulder into Mila's and then following up with a soft bump of the hip to match. She held it for a moment, warm and supporting, and fully knowing that Mila could tackle whatever problem Orist was having. And for now, as Rora handed over the money and got some change back, along with two borrowed waterproof bags for the books, that was enough. Chapter 12. Before we get to that, time to grab a title for Chapter 11. The No Duplicates Check, Bookworm, Esoteric Advice Granting Cat Lady, a bookworm is an improvement there for sure. A bookworm, Esoteric Advice Granting Cat Lady. Let's check what number 10 was. Bunched up, bottled down. Uh, I do think a bookworm fits there better. Although Esoteric Advice Granting Cat Lady is also a personal wish, so. Write what you know. So for viewers, Chapter 12 and Chapter 13 do have some discussion about alcohol overuse and consent while under the influence a little bit. Not a little bit. It's just discussion of consent under the influence. So heads up, that is why, at least on Twitch, there's some extra content warnings currently. And onward. Chapter 12. And what did she know? Rora was right. Mila had escorted her favorite duckling back to their home, where they had snagged a table for long enough to go over their spoils and decompress. But after a couple hours, they stashed their goods and split up. Mila was not sure where her friend had gone off to, but Mila had gotten a jump on some of her easier chores around the inn. Hinges got oiled and realigned, banishing any squeakiness that had managed to slip into the joints. And a few locks got tightened back up, vanquishing any looseness that made them a hassle to use. Neither task took more than a screwdriver, a hammer, and a smidge of grease. Hardly a brain-crunching challenge, but that just meant she was mentally chomping at the bit for when she returned to Orist the following day for the hope of future discounts. Either, sorry, for the hope of future discounts. Their issue was a much more fascinating problem. Apparently, they owned a family heirloom of sorts, a big, boxy monstrosity that amounted to a giant mechanical calculator that used a crank to register when it was time to math the stuff. Most fascinatingly to Mila, it was not in the base 2 system that she knew how to do things like that with, a consequence of her college education and too much Minecraft. It was a regular old base 10 ticking away with a vast array of gears and little spindles and shafts. It took a while of Mila's head being stuck in through the access door and Orist doing a basic addition on the machine at her direction, but Mila eventually put her claw on the problem. A gear-shifting lever had somehow gotten knocked out of alignment. Once identified, it took a bit more time for Mila to manage carefully infiltrating the machine to fix the issue, but she eventually managed to worm her arm in deep enough to adjust it to its proper place. Only after assuring that Orist was far away from the controls of the machine, though. That all ended up taking several hours, more than expected, but seeming like no time at all. The next couple of days helped even everything out. The weather drying out a bit let Mila and the others do some practice outside, and Mila finished up the rest of her chores, even if they did not have the big excitement of a mechanical calculator. Mila even took the time to crack open her big instruction manual and begin truly internalizing some new maneuvers, primarily centered around using her new tail weapon. It made her feel particularly dangerous, which in turn had her feeling pretty good. Beyond her exercising, which still had no small amount of marveling at her speed and flexibility, Mila mostly stayed in. Pulpy novel goodness was a comfort food for the soul, and even after she had eased much of the stresses from the last 2 weeks, she found herself not coming up with much reason not to indulge. She was still in the midst of the second act for one of the trashy-ish romance books. Heather still was containing her ass-kicking potential, and it was driving the kobold up the walls, when Aluka somehow managed to infiltrate her unlocked room and bodily pry her out of her reading den. "You've hardly left for days, and don't think I haven't noticed that you swiped my blankets for your nest," he accused, meeting the disbelieving harumph with a raised eyebrow, the second coming up to stave off the excuses that yes, she had come out for the necessary chores and to practice stabbing imaginary people to death. Mila could already hear him picking apart her defenses, and part of her agreed with the phantom arguments. Her brush with law enforcement, piled up with the grisly work just days before, had been rough. While the whole getting isekai'd thing was a big monkey wrench in the works that she was in no way going to bring up with her friends, it did not actually make the bullshit any worse. Pair that with her actually feeling better, and it was likely time for her to do something else beyond continuing to tear through her book haul. And so she split the difference, plodding along after the man while keeping her novel tucked under an arm. That way, she could peek some pages whenever she had the opportunity, and still be around for the food and drinks and whatever nonsense arguments that she felt overqualified to weigh in on. Just one of the many ways that Mila felt she exemplified the best of a kobold's many archetypal traits, clever as she was. Less clever, and in no way unexpected, was how little progress she actually made on her book once she got downstairs and into a booth. The clientele was nicer than usual, a little less rat hate than she preferred, but every time she'd drift away from Aluka and Hustus's lopsided conversation and into the written words, they would inevitably sprout off some opinion or fact that blatantly needed correcting, bringing her back. Where she Were she keeping track, she surely must have read the same left page a dozen times before she admitted to herself that no reading was gonna get done, dunking the novel onto the table and sliding it further away out of her reach. A good amount of the time, once she had put her book away, was spent by the resident human lamenting his bullshit magical abilities, something of a chronic topic for the fellow. While Mila could admit to herself that she was a bit jealous of being able to vaguely gesture and sprinkle some new age ingredients to produce nonsense results, she was vocally sympathetic to Aluka's point of contention. Those ingredients were expensive, unreasonably so, and the price was always going up, and the work of a wizard was not what he had ever wanted to do. No, his actual interests were of the chemical kind, although that included a good bit of biology for the Fantasyland analog of the profession. But by his own telling, his family had wanted him to train in the mystical stuff for prestige and purpose and yada yada, and he had been unwilling to stand up for himself at the time. His spine had only formed years later when he ditched the family business to leverage his talents for himself, even if he did not feel a passion for them. They were all, one way or another, running from something. Well-adjusted folks avoided tromping out into the dangerous wild world and running towards the pointy bits. But where Eustace's circumstances were completely unknown, and Mila tended to give an invective-fueled sentence summary for herself, Aluka laid it all out, just dissecting every little factor. Others might try to paint his rehashing as a pity party type deal, but Mila would likely tell anyone saying that to kindly and quickly fuck off. Eustace would not say that, but the kobold pinned them as being of much the same mind, trying to process all those expectations, how they interacted with what Aluka wanted for himself, where his talents and existing knowledge lay. It was not easy. Mila strongly suspected it never would be, and while she was up front with Aluka on the topic, she also made sure to reiterate that he was not at fault for anything negative in the situation. That all the discussion meandered and was constantly interrupted by drinks and several orders of steamed catfish and potato dumplings meant she had no clue which end of the conversation was up when Nana finally glided over to the table. Mila did not actually know if the gnoll had been in the kitchen or outside, but watching them slide onto the bench without And without slowing bodily slide Aluka further in was a treat that disrupted the talking enough that a change in topic was clearly needed. Mila, much more focused on stuffing her face with the pierogi adjacent treats, let the others figure that out for her. So naturally, she should not have been surprised when she was brutally verbally ambushed. So, Mila, while we have you here, what's the deal with you and Rora? Aluka slung her away, right as her jaws snapped shut on a morsel. It took her a few seconds of chewing and a hearty gulp to get ready to be ready to answer, being the classy lady that she was. Like, with what? Things are mostly normal. We went shopping. The others had been informed of their brush with the local law and had been understanding of Mila's reaction, so that probably was not it. Nana's follow up was not the sudden illumination that it felt like it should be either. You goof, he's talking about the two of you. You know. Nana made a gesture. Nana made a gesture, bringing their two sizable hands up parallel, then hopping them together. Mila looked at the hands before straightening up in her seat, eye ridged quirks. They could not mean. Or maybe they could. Maybe Mila's odd, appreciative glance was less subtle than she had thought. It caused her to blush a bit, heat rushing to her face and scales rising just slightly along her cheeks. A glance around the room was unneeded to ensure that Rora herself was not present, but was done anyway. I mean, well, shut up. I don't know. Maybe? Truly, a poet for the ages. One who was wasted on her uncomprehending audience, apparently. Like, I don't want things to be weird, right? She tried again. They'll work together. It's not the safest work, and well, what happened when she completely bombed that relationship, too? Mila left that unsaid. She knew she was not the most even keeled kobold, after all. She would be the first to admit that she seemed to oscillate between anger at the world at large and sadness that she was not acting on that anger enough, even if she did not know how. And Mila did not want that to splash all around her, like her stomping through the mud, especially if it meant getting mud on Rora. The look that the other three shared amongst themselves was suspicious, though. A silent message passed among them and right over Mila's head, which in turn gave her the sense that a pit was starting to open up under her feet. Eustace was the one who spoke. What about the Saturday before we left for the last job? The mention of the job put a momentary cloud over all of them, but Mila set to racking her brain. Is this the correct racking to use? Googling this. Okay. Both versions are correct. Racking without the W is more common. We're keeping it with. The mention of the job put a momentary cloud over all of them, but Mila set to racking her brain, brows knit, and all the others watched her even as the pit below her grew larger. Or below even as the pit below her grew larger and hungrier. The Saturday before had been started in a different bar, a change of scenery, in part because the establishment was trying out a new dish and Nana had wanted to sample it. No worries, it's slightly less of a chat delay for me. Uh, there is some delay between me speaking and then the stream going out. It's anywhere from like a 2 second to like 8 second delay, just depending on latency stuff. I don't know. I don't know software. The Saturday before had been started in a different bar, a change of scenery in part because the establishment was trying out a new dish, and Nana had wanted to sample it. Mila remembered not liking it, while the others had enjoyed it enough. Some kind of stringy plant thing. Shitty eggplant squash stuff. No clue what it actually was. Leaves were involved. After some time there, they had returned here and kept drinking, brought the party back with them, and probably kept drinking, because Mila's memories swiftly vanished into nothingness, obliterated by enough alcohol to kill a bear and an empty stomach because the food had not been tasty. Mila could feel the pit creep up into her metaphorical stomach now, its looming dread hanging over her, too. The three knew something because they remembered, and given the topic, she wanted to scream. Instead, one hand found the edge of the table, latched on hard, and pulled her forward to fiercely whisper through clenched fangs, "What about that Saturday?" The others at least keyed in that something was wrong and stooped low over the table to meet her, Iluka moving a hefty glass out of his way. "You got a pretty tipsy," he informed, which, yeah, she was catching on to that fucking fact. "And after a while, you and her wandered off to have a chat. Less sneaky than you thought you were being, though." Mila could feel the presence of deeper meaning in the words, although how much was there she did not yet know. Her toe claws clung to the edges of the pit, holding her up and waiting for the barest breeze to plunge her into the frozen abyss, yet somehow intuiting that their time was imminently up. She closed her eyes briefly, sinking down and forward so that she could halfway press the top half of her face against the table before muttering, "Have a chat like what?" Mila did not want to look at the others, to see their confusion or pity or condemnation for what she was implying here. Er, well, a quite pleasurable one. Roar seemed to be very vocal about her enjoyment. The cutlery on their table began to rattle and shake as Mila's other hand also found its grip on the table, small muscles straining to try and lift the heavy wood up high enough that Mila could slip under it as it fell and be squipped flat. Anything to escape, even if it meant not existing. The abyss was upon her, dragging her down, and she was a big dumb fucking idiot who quite clearly maybe had a binge drinking problem. "Fuck!" escaped loud and clear with the last surge of her minuscule strength against the furniture, enough to silence the other patrons that were present. The reiterating "fuck" came softer as Mila's muscles gave up, letting her body pull up on the table and drip down some into the seat. A viscous puddle of big dumb idiot. It explained that the weird little moments that she had just barely picked up on with Rora, too. The awkward looks and pauses. Mila should have known that she had screwed things up, but even if she had put that together, this was a fuck up far more colossal than she would have imagined. She dug her nails into the palms of her hands, squeezing hard and barely even feeling the prickle of claw tips. Nana had silently changed seats and slid in close, hand reassuringly on Mila's back, but it caused a spike of anger to rise up within the kobold. Her metaphorically melty form congealed, and perked. Mila jerked up, ready to lash out, but the words died before they got anywhere close to her lips. All three were worried, really worried about her, and even she could see that. It could have been it would have been much nicer if any of them had said something sooner, but biting at them would be an attempt to blame anyone else other than herself. And beyond that, they. You don't understand, y'all. Mila's voice was low, and she could feel her traitorous body waver the sound just a little bit to match her eyes that suddenly felt watery. It's a kobold thing. It's. Ugh, uh, it's a whole long thing that has gross biology reasons and babies, but kobolds don't do one night stands. Courtship is a whole long thing, and just. The explanation did not pick up, and in the gap, Mila hoisted a heavy cup of water and drained it. She definitely did not use that as a distraction to swipe at her eyes and try to recenter herself. And if she did, she definitely succeeded and was the picture of perfect calm. Darlin, explain it to us slowly. Take your time. It's all right, Nana reassured. Mila chose not to recognize the vipery gaze that Eustace swept the room with, telling anyone still hushed in the hopes of getting some new gossip just how well that would be taken. Those who had been holding out for scraps caught the message and got back to their own conversations. The boiling cauldron of sadness at how Rora must feel and anger at herself continued to churn and bubble and hiss, but Mila took a little bit of time, not making it any less bitter or volatile, but moving it off the heat just a smidgen. After a little bit, enough time for even the more resolute eavesdroppers to take the hint and fuck off, Mila tried to start over. Kobolds have a lot of hatchlings. Healthy kobolds have a lot more when they get around to it. And because it needed to be reiterated, she did a lot. So for us, proper romance is slow and drawn out and just not like the stupid books we read. Not that there's anything wrong with all that. Mila fluttered a hand, waving off the non-existent defenses from the non-kobolds. Hell, Science-Land Mila grokked it, even if her style had been more leaning into certain stereotypes about what was brought to a first date. It's just not how things are done proper for us. It's scandalous. There were sounds of acknowledgement from the mammals, a grunt of understanding, and a pair of thoughtful hums. And fuck, what, I got too drunk, whisked her away, ravaged her, and then I just go on like nothing happened because I don't remember jack shit? What a piece of shit thing to do. Tears threatened to rise up again, burning hot. Ravaged might be you reading too many bodice rippers, Aluka oh so helpfully supplied, and nearly earned an empty cup to the face if Eustace had not shot a hand out to intercept. While the vessel clinking down onto the table was firm, it was the human who caught the rebuking glare. Mila had more on her plate, though, her mouth opened to spill out something more. But there was no defense for her actions, not one she could find, nor one she would field if she could find it. It took a few tries before anything burbled up. If I wanted to do something, if that's all I wanted to do things right for, Fuck. Not take advantage of her and hurt her and ruin everything, and her mind raced around in circles. No clue where to go, and Mila's words died with it. Thankfully, she was not the only person at the table. Now, I reckon this does change some things, I think. Nana slowly supplied, steadily, watching carefully to make sure their words were landing properly. For one, we should have said something sooner. Immediately, since you were up that bad. But a heavy finger prodded Mila's chest from across the table. Continuity issue. They are not across the table, they're next to. A heavy finger prodded at Mila's chest directly, straightening her up a little bit. There's no way you did anything that Aurora wasn't fully enjoying and party to herself. And you only messed up how you think Aurora will want things. That you are thinking of what she wants is good, but a damn sight better if and you just listen to her. Yeah? Your best bet is to do just that. Talk to her, listen to what she has to say for yourself, talk for yourself. I cannot speak fully to the matter, but I'm pretty sure you've botched things much less than you think. Having said their piece, Nana eased back, nodding once deeply. Aluka actually piped in with a tidbit that was genuinely helpful. You're getting in your own head too much. And after a few moments, Mila hesitantly nodded too. Maybe. Hopefully, she was. And at the very least, she owed Aurora an explanation for something. Anything. Sitting silent as a stump certainly was not the right thing to do. End of chapter 12. Chapter title. Better claw on the problem, not feeling that one. Phantom arguments. Out of her reach. Prestige and purpose and yada yada. I'm not quite feeling there either. Phantom arguments. Out of her reach. Pity party type deal. Brutally verbally ambushed. The two of you. About that Saturday. Big dumb fucking idiot. A vicious puddle of big dumb idiot. Sorry, viscous, not vicious. Silent as a stump. Getting rid of silent as a stump. Viscous puddle of big dumb idiot is better than big dumb fucking idiot. Less likely to need to, censor the title. About that Saturday. Not feeling that one. The two of you. I think I like Phantom Arguments the most. Phantom Arguments 'cause it has both her defense of, or sorry, her her own arguments getting picked apart by Luca's imagined arguments, and then her beating herself up over these actions. And this chapter is a little bit more serious, so Viscous Puddle of Dumb Idiot, Big Dumb Idiot, doesn't quite match the vibe. This chapter, in case none of the previous text kind of conveyed that this character does have flaws, this would be the chapter. Admittedly, I have a bad habit of getting into my own head as well. Squip is obviously a verb. Squipped, obviously the past participle verb or whatever it is. Chapter 13. This chapter has the same warnings as the previous one. Kind of dicier topics. Of course, there was a difference between recognizing what she needed to do and actually being able to get up and make herself do the thing. Thankfully, Mila's friends helped further bolster her for the terrifying journey up the stairs where Aurora was apparently in her room, reiterating that the best thing to do was to talk with and listen to Aurora fully. They were also Aurora's friends, and so also wanted the best for her, helped solidify that advice by leaps and bounds. With that lighting a fire under her rear, and the knowledge that sorry, that typo's throwing me off. With that lighting a fire under her rear, and the knowledge that retreat would need to be either through them or out a window, Mila scampered up the steps, hardly slowed by the exaggerated height of the human scale architecture. She even took the corners fast in the mad dash hopes that she could get to Rora's door before her courage fled her entirely, and that nobody was rounding the turns fast enough that she could not dodge. Her luck held strong on both accounts, and her fist rapped against the door to her friend's room in a flurry before she stepped back. And then stepped back a second time, gulping down sudden concerns that whispered to run away. That jumping out a second-story window was absolutely a viable option. The door opened right as Mila was nervously rubbing around her eyes, paranoid about them being conspicuously red. But her friend's warm, "Mila, good afternoon. How are you doing?" meant that her earlier, more volatile, upset state did not show, or at least would go uncommented on. Hey, Rora, Mila gulps, really landing the opening for a potentially awkward conversation. Hey, Rora, Mila gulped, really landing the opening for a potentially awful conversation. Do you mind if we talk for a bit? Less presumptuous than asking if she could come in, all things considered, but also harder to outright say no to. About a few weeks ago, and she could see the mild blush that played across Roar's face, but there was none of the distress or shame or anger that she had feared there. Not that Mila not seeing it meant much of anything, but Roar swept back, extending an arm to sweep the bedroom behind her, her sundress dancing with the movement. Of course, please enter. Sorry, of course, please enter. And enter Mila did, uncomfortably waddling into the middle of the room and just standing there until Aurora pulled herself up onto the bed and motioned for Mila to join her. And she did, even if she did so like she was clambering up a mountain, forgoing her usual bouncing enthusiasm, for she folded her legs before her and faced the golden sun. Mila had considered ways to best start into the actual meat of the conversation, but all her workshopped words fled her. Instead, things just tumbled out of her mouth, a stream of thoughts and worries launched directly at the person who, by all accounts she cared to measure by, Mila had wronged. The thumping in her ears was overwhelming. I am so sorry, but I drank way too much on an empty stomach, and I can't hardly remember anything. But then the others mentioned that something happened, and fuck, I am so sorry. I am super worried that I've screwed everything up between us, which I had a lot of hopes for around, which I had a lot of hopes around that maybe if you were interested, but I'm not. I'm way more worried that I hurt you or something, anything, because I really don't want to do that in any way, but that just makes me. The faucet of jumbled words and fragmented thoughts was opened fully, and Mila's eyes wheeled as they tried to track what she was saying, which meant she did not register the solid golden fingertip until it was at the end of her snout, pressing against her lips to pause her. I, I can leave if you need time, or if you need me to go, Mila finished, limping across the finish line as her words slipped past the finger. The answer was an immediate no, and Rora's face was complicated. Too complicated. There was some hurt there, but all muddled up with embarrassment and thoughtfulness and maybe a smidgen of relief. Mila did not know, but it was also not her place to demand answers here. So instead, she just sat and waited, growing increasingly conscious of the index finger still pressed against her, but not moving to break the contact. The fingertip, claw kept away from her nose, was warm enough to almost be uncomfortable. Were she not tense enough to serve as a piano wire, it would likely be very distracting. Eons spun into seconds before the silence was broken, Rora having had the time she needed. I, uh, after realizing something might have been wrong, or sorry, after realized something might have been wrong, and I should have figured that out beforehand. My apologies. Which, all things considered, was about the last thing Mila was expecting to hear, and threw a monkey wrench. I just recently mentioned monkey wrenches in the story. here, and threw a spanner, not a monkey wrench, that's clearly different things, into her already sketchy thought engine, swiftly followed by the rest of the toolbox. The stuttering refutation of the apology that it was not needed and all was Mila's fault was caught by a small shake of Rora's head as she readied herself to continue. We both drank quite a bit, which I should have known you were hit harder. You really did not take well to the snacks of the evening, and with that in mind, you were in no state to be admitting to, well, much of anything outside of sleeping it off. Especially if you cannot remember any of it. I did not know that. Aura sighed deeply, and her hand started to slip away from Mila, but the pink kobold instead leaned forward to follow it minutely. A nice reminder to shut the fuck up and listen was going a long ways right now. And it was clear Rora had more to say, and was saying her piece much better than Mila had said hers. That morning, you were sleeping harder than usual. That following morning, you were sleeping harder than usual, so I got you some water and something to eat, but left it at that. Another big sigh, or as big as a 3 foot tall woman can be with her size. I thought it best to let you rest, and we could talk about things later. But when you seemed to have ignored what happened, I grew concerned, but was unsure how to help, or if you wanted help. Another pause, this time the eloquent Rora's words vanishing on her for a second. As more time passed, it got harder to figure out a way to broach the topic. And much like your own concerns, I feared that I had taken things too far and perhaps taken advantage of you and what I would have liked for us to have someday. That you were still you around me was a bit confusing, but you are very kind, and I was worried that perhaps you were just keeping up appearances, either for my sake or the team's. The accusation of being kind yanked up a dark chuckle from Mila that rushed against the quieting finger, but tidbits of tension began to eke from her body. There was a lot there to figure out, a lot of details Mila felt the need to analyze, but first was the here and now. Once she was certain Rora had said her piece, Mila cleared her throat softly. Let's have two discussions then. We should talk about our feelings on what happened, and on how we feel us should move forward. Just crack open those two tangles of emotions, share them open and honestly without reservation, talk it over. Real easy stuff, no problem. That Mila then immediately punted the follow up was no surprise, then, mouth opening and closing. A short time spiraled into a long time, but Rora was there, watching her intently. Eventually, she managed to get the words moving like molasses through her throat, threatening to choke her out again. Just a second. Stay hydrated. My biggest concern, far and away, is that I forced you into anything, drunken as I was. I guess that ties into the second conversation. All of this does, obviously. Duh. Um, I want to respect your boundaries, and since finding out that stuff happened, I was panicking. Assuming I had done exactly that. And even barring that having happened, not remembering feels really shitty. I haven't had much time to think through everything there, mostly because that first stuff is bigger to me. But I kind of feel like I let us both down, maybe. You do not have to worry about. You do not have to worry yourself with my participation. I am quite a bit stronger than you, not that is the end all, be all for being able to enforce my willingness, but you have never made me feel unsafe in that way or otherwise. Just a second. Need a bit to signify that Zora is speaking. Zora nodded. You do not have to worry yourself with my participation. I'm quite a bit stronger than you, not that that is the end all be all for being able to enforce my willingness, but you have never made me feel unsafe in that way or otherwise. No, you did not take any liberties that were not freely given, Mila. You were sweet and very attentive. When there was no progression afterwards, I feared that perhaps I might have been overly enthusiastic, or maybe not attentive enough in my reciprocations. That you needed room and that I needed to give that to you. Or perhaps that I had read more into things than you wanted. Which then festered on your end, I guess. Fuck. And I found out just now, and here we are. And here we are, Rora confirmed with a nod, her finger trailing down to then push up on the bottom of Mila's chin just so. And before we talk about going further, I think it's best to consider where that puts us right now. Made sense to Mila. I know I'm mostly worried about how you're feeling, and I'm kicking myself a good bit. And it sounds like you've been worried about me, and maybe kicking yourself a bit too, giving me space as a result. It was clear to both of them how Aurora's soft-handed approach and Mila's lack of memory had fed into each other to exacerbate the brewing situation for Aurora. But that was something to address on moving forward, Mila felt, and it would be important. Aurora picked up the thread easily enough, finding the back and forth bounce of the conversation to be very much like when the group was planning a job. So now I'm certainly feeling a bit better, with some regrets on how I handled things. Just ways that I should have handled it better for the both of us. And the same for yourself? She had to press down onto the fingertip, holding her head up to give her nod, but Mila gave it anyway. And with that confirmation, the bulk of the tension drained out of both of them. The frantic tornado of concern that Mila's entrance had brought sweeping out and away. In its wake, fatigue loomed, but they still had that warmth of moving forward that kept the two from collapsing wholesale. I am kind of very embarrassed that my drinking got that bad. That feels like something to work on too for myself. A glimmer shined in Rora's eye as she continued taking that first step. I would not be against picking up where we left off, or a tad earlier than that, she said with a smirk that got Mila's heart pounding more than it had any right to. But with the rockings there, maybe moving a bit slower this time. That's not a must. But that I thought I had messed things up was very worrying, and I don't want that again. Which is part of why we're talking this out here, right? We hash this out, communicate what we want, help prevent any worries. And I'm fine with not immediately jumping into your bed. Mila took a moment to glance down at Rora's bed that they were both sitting upon, metaphorically. But I do not want a traditional courting either. Both women looked like they had eaten lemons, or something even worse. Mila happened to like lemons quite a bit. She pushed on, suppressing the shiver at considering the scripted steps of such a relationship. If anything, she had undersold the process to the others downstairs. I am interested in a relationship, though, Mila said, and a quirk of an iridge led to Rora nodding deeply, sparking warm fluffies in the pink woman's stomach. End dates, just the two of us. It doesn't have to be big things, and I'm not even sure what a big thing would be around here, but it can be big stuff too. Small things will be good, though. I would have a lot of fun. That sounds delightful, Mila. I would love a date or two, and a relationship to boot, was Rora's answer to the question that was not actually asked, a wink buoying up the playful response. It'll be a few weeks, but I think I even have a big date in mind. A party that would be an easy excuse to wear some of those nice clothes you ordered and do some dancing, maybe? And that seemed like a perfect thing to do. Mila was giddy at the idea, even. Even if formal events were not her preferred environment, attending such a shindig as Rora's plus one felt like it would be something she could handle just fine and enjoy even more than that. Being the plus one for the dazzling jewel of an event was its own fun. Before then, we should still, Mila spoke, picking up speed to plan out a series of preceding smaller dates when she was interrupted by a solid knock against the door. Just two strikes, but sharp enough to shatter the cozy mood of the room and set both kobolds to straightening up in their spots, throwing looks at each other. Not that they had any reason to be guilty over anything. Aluka, for his part in the surprise, at least sounded apologetic when he said, "Sorry to interrupt, but we got another job and it's looking like a rush. Tell us downstairs and there's circumstances, apparently. Come down when you can, please." The faint thumps of heavy human footsteps sounded as the man headed away, back toward the stairs he had come from. The two women looked at the door for a beat before moving back, both concerned enough to know they had to wrap their discussion quickly. Mila struck first, an uncharacteristic bubbly smile shining. "After this job, then. A few small dates, coffee or books or the like. Maybe we go to your fancy party and really show off. Just to see if we're compatible, of course." She slid off the bed and turned to offer up a hand to guide Rora down safely. Rora took the hand, but did not let it go immediately once she had her feet on the floor. "Well, how did you know I like books and coffee?" she joked before her grin grew sly, devious. "And I have it on good authority we are quite compatible, Mila. Your tale is enough to make a lady blush." Mila did blush at that, but waggled her irises, shimmying her tail as she turned and drawing up a blush of her own on Rora as she opened up the door. letting them spill the cheery, secretive little atmosphere of their development into the hall before they began to put their game faces on. They had a job waiting on them, after all, and only after that would they be able to explore what they had properly. This bit is author notes, depressing author notes that will be skipped. Frantic Tornado of Concern is prospective title. Words moving like molasses, real easy stuff. The accusation of being kind. Shut the fuck up and listen. Positive jumbled words. I think that was the earliest one. Yeah, Frantic Tornado of Concern. And the accusation of being kind feel the strongest there of the options. Thank you for the oof. That's definitely the intended vibe. Like, you know, crash into the conversation. Or not even conversation, into the relationship, not quite knowing what's already been covered. I also really like the accusation of being kind. I think I'm gonna stick with Frantic Tornado of Concern. So I will admit my voice is getting a little bit hoarse earlier than usual today. Too much chit chatting at the day job, not enough pre gaming with tea, probably. I'm likely going to end stream here after the nice, emotionally stressful chapter. Man, I also. Sorry, clicking through modes on my avatar. There we go, there's the skull. Accusations of kindness will probably come up at a later time. In addition to, binge drinking and getting up in her own head, Mila doesn't really think of herself as a kind person. So, stuff to unpack later point within the tale. I hope anybody watching has a pleasant evening or whatever time of day it is for you. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for watching. Hope you're enjoying. Feel free to, I don't know, yell at me in the chat or comments, whatever. And see y'all next week. Same slime time, same slime place. See ya.